Доброго дня, шановні пані та панове.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who joined our round table and all those who joined us online. My name is Olena Tregub, the Executive Director of the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission. And today I'm happy to welcome everyone at this round table, and we would like to present a new analysis by NAKO that is dealing with the medical procurements by MOD, corruption risks and recommendations. Here is the analysis of largest medical procurements and tenders over 2020 by the MOD. We've analyzed any corruption risks during the procurements, as well as some of those corruption risks that were subject to investigation by the law enforcement agencies, as well as some of the problems that exist in the supply system for the medical resources to the MOD. And the health and safety of the servicemen is absolutely important and crucial for the armed forces. We've already once analyzed the medical supplies in 2017, and during that analysis, we've analyzed the overall system of the MOD. It has changed since then, and the major role was transferred to the medical command of the IFU instead of the medical department of the MOD. Although some of the risks remained, unfortunately, and this is the topic for our today's discussion, and I would like to underline that NAKO is the civil organization to counter the corruption in defense, and we clearly understand that if the health and medical supplies to servicemen is the condition for the effective operation of the armed forces, and if we are talking about any corruption or ineffectiveness in this system, then it might severely impact the combat readiness of our armed forces. So we should not spoil any resources, we should not create any risks for the servicemen on the front lines. That is why this topic is extremely important. That is why we have invited some international independent experts who analyzed this problem, as well as the representatives of the medical command of the armed forces of Ukraine. Also, we have here the representatives of the Department for Procurements of the MOD, as well as some of the volunteers engaged in the medical supplies for the servicemen on the front line. I'm happy to welcome a few other guests and a key MP, Maryana Bezugla. She will join us online. In fact, she's already here. She's the deputy head of the Committee on the National Security and Defense and Intelligence. She is a medic, a doctor by profession. She has received a medical education in the University of Bohumoltsa, and she was a medical worker on the front line, provided assistance in the development of a medical supply system for the AFU while working in the project office of the reforms in the MOD. So before becoming an MP, she led the program on reforming the medical supply system for the AFU. And that is why her point is very important, since she's working in the legislation and she worked as specifically with the medical support system. And it would be extremely great to hear the point of view of Maryana Bezugla. I can hear you. Good, great that you're with us. I've just mentioned your experience in medical sphere, particularly the military medical sphere. And I have a question to you. Considering your profound experience and the fact that you have worked in the project office of the MOD, which has introduced significant changes. So how do you assess the changes in the medical supply system of the MOD and the AFU? What is the status of this system? Is there any new initiative or initiatives that you know of or that you support with regards to the development of this system in further? Thank you. I'm happy to see all of you, and it's great that we have such a perfect activity. Unfortunately, I have just a couple of minutes because we have an extraordinary session of the committee in a couple of minutes, and I started my work in the project office of reform. Then it was a separate program. We cooperated with the Deputy Minister of Defense responsible for that. So I was an inspector on special tasks, so to say. I don't remember the exact name of the position, but really I was responsible for the medical reform and the establishment of a medical command. And that was the final stage of my efforts. And we've completed that when I've already become an MP. So that's a long story. But talking about the 2020 and 2021, I'm not able to provide with detailed information on any new initiatives or trends within the medical command. We have the representatives of the AFU, they could provide more information on that. On the overall, this reform provided for the consolidation of efforts and a clear vertical chain of command, because before the reform, there were a number of medical departments. There was a medical department, there was military medical directorate who not cooperated in a proper manner. And it's all about the medical resources, really, for the proper support and supply of the servicemen. I've learned your experience. In my understanding, you haven't found a significant number of violations, yet you had found a number of violations, particularly certain violations regarding the misuse of the position or the misconduct in order to offer certain privileges to certain companies. And the Special Bureau for Investigation is currently doing investigation on some of the cases you've mentioned. Speaking on your report, there is, give me a second, with regarding to the limited competition and insufficient market analysis. We should take into consideration the specifics of the medical supplies. If we are procuring certain medical equipment, in some cases, it's a unique medical equipment. It can be unique in terms of specific specifications of medical equipment, and these could be provided only by a few manufacturers of this equipment. This should be taken into consideration. Even the technical requirements, they could be created for certain equipment. For example, some of the equipment that is doing the X-rays or tomography. So these could be the specifications for those equipment that are available on the market. Just wanted to underline this one. Then there is another example. You have found that out of 95 procurements subject to analysis, 86 procurements were provided or were conducted, in fact, under limited competition with only 2 bidders participating. For example, with regards to biopharma and many other companies. It's not about the companies, it's about the specificity and the uniqueness of certain equipment, and as well as some medicines. Some medicines can be very unique, but I think the representatives of the medical command could be providing more professional commands. If you have any questions to me, then I'm happy to answer that, because currently we have established the single and uniform vertical chain of command, the only algorithm for the division of resources and the allocation of resources on medical supplies. So I've done my work, and currently I'm working on another wider project within the committee. And currently I'm working in the field of Euro-Atlantic integration, and it's far away from medical supply system, another topic, so to say. Well, Maryana, please agree with these words that a proper medical supply system for the armed forces, this is something that NATO wants from us, because the cases of limited competition, when we are overpaying during the procurements, this is something that our taxpayers are not happy with and our partners are not happy with. Yes, indeed. And I have a question as I need to go, really. This a question about research. What do you think? How much money we could save more? I mean, there are some risks. There is an outrageous case which is currently under investigation of the State Bureau of Investigation, but really, I don't see any systemic violations. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can introduce a few figures, like how much money we could save on those competitions. We could have saved, in fact, on the procurement. Yes, I'll pass the floor to Svitlana Musiiaka, an expert of NAKO. We are going to make a presentation. We will provide some figures and percentages, but I can give you a brief answer. Yes. Even under conditions of limited competition on the market of medical supplies and medicines, it is still possible to save certain money if you have more bidders during the tender, if the requirements to the tender documents do not contain limited competition provisions. Those cases that we've mentioned in our report, whenever we have only 2 bidders, then the amount of money saved during this tender is something like 1%. Well, I'm sorry, I do have to go, and there will be an information on the report presented. Do you think, would it be possible to provide more competition? Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is a uniqueness, there is specificity of these or that procurements. Some of the procurements are made by civilian institutions as well with regards to the same equipment and medicines. Yes, absolutely. We could have saved much more. And should we talk about the military unit? The military unit was procuring antibiotics, and they provided a proper technical requirements. There were 5 bidders on the tender, and we've managed to save 41% of the procured price. And if we take a look at the Central Procurement Organization, which is doing the procurement for the Ministry of Health, then the average percentage of money saved during the tender is around 20%. Thank you. One more issue. I really need to go, but I have one question more. You've mentioned that a few information on COVID procurement. So you've mentioned that with regards to COVID procurements, there are no problems. Whenever there are the risks of corruption with regards to COVID procurements, you have not found any violations. As for COVID procurements, we have analyzed a number of customers. And speaking on the procurement items, we have not found any like illegal items under those COVID procurements. But there are questions with regards to the need to conclude agreements with some of the companies after the tender was cancelled for individual protection equipment and medical masks. This agreement was terminated because of the corruption scandal that we're going to discuss later on. We found that there was another agreement concluded, although with companies that are associated with the former official of the MOD. I'm sorry, I really need to go, but still my assistant advisor, Lilia, will stay. So let's have the following proposal. Please share with us this report. And I'm talking about share this report with the National Security and Defense Committee, and we will have it processed and we will send it to the law enforcement agencies for the analysis. And this will also promote this report among the other users, and we'll send it to the MOD. So we'll serve as additional mediators in order to reinforce this report. Thank you. Thank you, Maryana, for this participation. Yes, everyone have a good health and have an effective work. Thank you. So now I would like to pass the floor to Svitlana Musiiaka, and she's an expert and one of the authors of the report, for us to make a brief presentation on some of the corruption risks we've identified, what we have analyzed, any standard violations, some of them we've already mentioned, and what do we recommend in order to, well, improve the situation for the better. Well, thank you for the ability to present the result of work by a team of experts. Indeed, we have ran the analysis over a considerable period of time, since there was a lot of information to process. Well, the subject matter for the analysis were public procurements over 2020, and we've decided to concentrate on medical equipment, hygienes, and medicines. We've analyzed the procurements by the MOD, as well as the 6 largest customers subordinated to the MOD. These are military medical clinical centers. The major idea of the research was to identify the corruption risks based on the analysis of specific cases and specific procurement procedures, and to use them in order to come up with a series of recommendations on how to improve the procurement procedures. On open biddings, we have analyzed 120 procurements, 9 open biddings of the MOD, and 12 largest tenders of 6 customers. Here are some basic figures, so please pay attention to our report. Please read this, because these are just the major aspects for the MOD. So there were around 100 customers. The total value of tenders was something around 1 billion hryvnia, and the detailed analysis is contained on this report. Considering the situation that we are facing in 2020, and unfortunately we continue to face this situation in 2021, we could not avoid the COVID procurements, so we were using the information that is openly available. And as we've already discussed, these customers were using a simplified procedure to procure the legal list, the available list of the procured items. So there were no violations at that point of time. And at certain points, at certain tenders, the Ministry of Defense managed to procure certain items at less cost than civilian organizations. In the same time, we've identified a number of violations and corruption risks on tenders. So the first group of violations is limited competition by introducing certain requirements into the technical documentation, resulting in the reduced number of bidders, either through asking or requesting for letter of commitment, or introducing the requirements that match only one medicine, then increasing the cost of procurements. We had a case when the cost of the agreement included some of the expenses and expenditures not related to the procurement item, and because of the improper market research or the lack of preliminary analysis, the procurement item did not allow to save the amount of money that could be saved by the customers. And then we had a misconduct on the part of the participants of the bidding process and certain officials of the customer. Should we talk about risks more specifically? As for the limitation of competitions during the procurements, so the less bidders you have, the less budget could be saved. So the total majority of cases and procurements were conducted on condition of only 2 bidders. And that is the minimum number of bidders that you need to have in order to tender. In some cases, they've required a special letter, commitment letter, and this was called an improper practice on the part of a number of ministries, as this may result in a limitation of a number of bidders that could receive this letter of commitment from the manufacturer, like in case of procuring the immunoglobulin. In that case, only the manufacturer and the other company who managed to acquire a letter of commitment from that manufacturer. Now, if there are many bidders, like in the case of a military unit of 4650, so they had 5 bidders and managed to save 41% of the budget money. So as we can see, the medical center for southern region, we can see a lot of letters of commitment, and it results in only 2 bidders, and the amount of money saved is around 1%. And whenever you have 3 bidders, this already produces 7% of money saved. Here is another example when the trademark of the medicine or certain requirements to the packaging was indicated in the technical requirements. This is also the procurement by the southern region of Military Medical Center. So they've provided the technical requirements in the same way that it matched only one medicine, even though it's an Ambrexol, it's a fairly traditional type of medicine. Then another risks in some agreements, and we can see that from the military medical clinical center of the Western region, we have analyzed 18 procurements, and all of that required the supplier to pay the consultancy services to the third party. They were not related to the procurement item, that is the supply of medicines. It was around 10 to 12,000 hryvnia. So on the overall, the amount to be paid to consultants is 194,000. And this is really a salary for one additional official who could deal with that procurements and could provide some appraisal expert assistance on the procurement. So unfortunately, the lack of proper analysis of the market resulted in the fact that not all the procurements could happen successfully. And one of the hygiene, as a standard soap, when the Ministry of Defense pronounced a number of tenders. At first, there was a tender, 4 tenders in May, June. In the same time, the tender did not happen because of the technical documents. The bidders applied to the MOD to change those requirements, but this was not done. After a while, the Ministry of Defense has announced another tenders, but unfortunately, it didn't happen as well. So hopefully, if the analysis of the market would be conducted and the technical requirements would be written in the other manner, then there could be a competition. The report contains several examples when the customers were procuring different equipment, sophisticated equipment like an X-ray system or any testing solutions at a price which is higher than the average market price. If you take a look at this example, you can see that they could have overpaid 65,000 hryvnia on that system. And the other group of risks is dealing with the misconduct on the part of the participants in the form of nominal competition, and it could be a misconduct on the part of the officials of the customer. For example, speaking of participants, we have identified that several military units were were announcing a number of procurements, and they were matching specifically the products by urea farm, and the other company who participated in the bidding failed to provide a lot of documents, and that was the only competitor to urea farm. When we've analyzed this other company, it's appeared that they've participated in over 100 tenders, although never worked successfully. So we could assume that this participant was not intended to win this tender. So it was just participating in the tender simply to provide a nominal competition. And then there was a number of high cases of the possible violation on the part of the officials of the customer. There was a case with the medical masks on the 16th of June. The State Bureau of Investigation reported that pretrial investigation is completed and the case was taken to the court. It was all because of some officials, particularly one representative of the medical command and the commander of one company. They've conspired in order to receive a kickback and to conclude an agreement with certain company and then accepted the products without proper documents. We'll see what would be the court decision, but they could be imprisoned for 5 to 10 years even. But of course, the final word has to be made by the court. Then another case was the procurement by the medical command of 10 ALV apparatuses. According to the information of the State Bureau of Investigation, there are certain claims with regards to the complete set and the technical specifications of those equipment. At this point, we're still waiting for the results of the investigation. So having analyzed our sort of outcomes of the analysis, we came up with a range of recommendations, but please read this report. Of course, we could not mention all the bright examples in this presentation. There are a lot of interesting aspects in the report. We could not mention all of them. So we believe that the professionalization of procurements, it could increase the amount of money saved out of the tender. It would also increase the effectiveness of procurements, and it would relieve the MOD and the IFU from the functions that are not proper to them. Then the other recommendation is to increase the competition, to avoid any artificial requirements. There is no need to mention the letter of commitment. There is no need to introduce certain packaging for medicines, particularly the trademarks. And this recommendation was something that was mentioned not only by us, but the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Health, the National Agency on Corruption Prevention, the Anti-Monopoly Committee, all of them mentioned this. You just simply need to implement those issues. The recent amendments to the law on public procurements, they provide more authorities with regards to market analysis, and this could improve the procurement procedure and provide for a proper amount of money saved out of the procurements. Of course, you cannot include any additional expenditures on the contract which are not related to the procurement item. We're talking about the payment for the consultancies. And also, there shouldn't be any responsibility for the violation of the terms of agreement. This is something that has to be included into the provisions of the contract so that certain sanctions may be imposed on the manufacturer. Then you should verify the contractors, analyze the preliminary or previous contracts, not only on medical procurements, but his overall behavior on the market, because this could be a red flag of misconduct on the part of this contractor. So this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Svitlana. Indeed, we've heard specific recommendations by NAKO as the result of the analysis. And as I've already mentioned, we have representatives of the medical command, Mikhailo Zagorodny, senior officer at the Department for Analysis and Coordination of Procurements at the Medical Supply Department. And we have one more representative of the medical department, Tatiana Lukyanenko. She works as an expert in the Department for Analysis and Coordination of Procurements. So basically, you are the practitioners, so to say, and you work in this field that we have described in our report. Can you tell me if you agree with some of the recommendations that we've mentioned, and particularly some of the, or in fact, most of the procurements have only 2 bidders and the competition is too low, which results in the recommendations that we had. I mean, some of the recommendations, they're not implemented because the technical requirements to procurement items, they are not properly made. So would you agree that complying with those recommendations would improve the procurement process, or do you have any other words to say with regards to the improvement of the medical procurements. Maybe, Mihailo, you could start. Good afternoon. Yes, we do have a problem, and this problem is being solved currently. There is a number of violations on public procurements, and we need to have the competent authorities to deal with some of the cases, particularly in the procurements of the Western region with regards to the additional services to be paid by the supplier. Yet the procedure was a transparent one, and every participant of the tender could indicate that violation and have certain response on the part of the customer. And I've analyzed the situation, and there were no claims on the part of the bidders. Yes, we have only 2 bidders, but where are any appeals to discriminatory conditions? If that's a question to me, well, we could not cover all the issues in the presentation. There were appeals, in fact, and there were certain sanctions imposed by the Anti-Monopoly Committee on certain customers, and the courts are in progress on some of the complaints. It's just that there is a trend that we cannot leave as they are. We need to make some administrative decisions in order not to have such a high-profile cases, particularly the criminal proceedings. That is why I'd say that our recommendations should be used as the tool to sort of highlight the problems and search for solutions. Well, thank you for the assistance. We take into consideration our previous mistakes, and certain personnel decisions are being made. So the medical command is trying to prevent any possible risks for the future. Speaking on what was mentioned by Maryana, Bezugla, indeed, we are procuring some of the specific and unique medical items, unique in terms of supplying and in terms of specifications. And this is something that also needs to be taken into account while analyzing our activity. Thank you. Thank you, Mihailo. Ms. Tatiana, would you like to add something? Good afternoon. I would like to add that there are certain risks, as in any other procurements. The only thing we need to aspire of is the professionalization of procurements. Indeed, in many military units, they don't have the specifically trained personnel, so a certain decision needs to be made by the medical command or by the leadership, and this is something we need to work on because it has a significant impact on the procurements. And indeed, this is a recommendation of NAKO to introduce a professionalization. But how this could be done? In the frames of the MOD, under the previous minister, there was a central procurement institution established. But unfortunately, the current Minister of Defense has eliminated this institution, so we won't have professionalization at this point. Then we have a professionalized institution in our country, which is procuring everything for the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. So all the medical procurements are running through that institution, and we've made an analysis of their activity as well, and they provide for a lot of budget saved as the result of procurement, something around 27%. So if the Ministry of Defense is unable to create such an institution, maybe these existing centralized procurement institution could be used. Well, we are not authorized to comment on that. This is a question to the leadership. Although I believe that there is a certain specifics in military medical procurements. It's unique, really. That is why I think we should train our own personnel. If we could have the support from a Department of Medical Procurements, then we would have the resources necessary to increase the effectiveness of our procurements. So you're saying about the partnership, maybe a partnership indeed. This is not my level of competence, but from what I can see, we can see about the procurements on Prosaro, and really those procurements result in a significant amount of money saved. Maybe we could work in partnership on writing technical requirements or resources. I think that could be a good option of cooperation. Do you have such a cooperation on the part of medical command or the department? Well, unfortunately, this is not on our table today. So you just analyze. Yes, I do the analysis. But based on the previous experience. Thank you, Tatiana. We also have a representative of the Department for Public Procurements at the MOD. Ms. Tatiana, do you share the point of view of your colleagues from the medical command? Well, there is a problem in procurements, but in most cases, this is about the military units and not the centralized procurement institutions. So it's all about are there the corruption risks or certain mistakes, mostly related to technical specifications requiring certain documents, but not about the procedure for procurements. There are no claims with regards to the procedure of procurements. That is why I think the military units, they should deal with something else, but not the procurements. Because one commander of a military unit, he could not be aware of anything. He could not do the command and he could not do the management of procurements at the same time. Absolutely right. When the as you've explained, when there was a procurement of a sophisticated equipment, whenever there was a procurement at a central and an executive level, so at the central level, they've managed to buy certain sophisticated equipment at a far less price. So the military units and the regional hospitals, they have, well, less expertise in this area. And in fact, most of the corrupt cases are related to sort of low-level military units and organizations. And also, in addition to, well, representatives of officials, we have Katarina Primak together with us today. And she's a veteran. She's a co-founder of a civil association called Women's Veterans Movement. She worked as the paramedic in a voluntary medical battalion Hospitalieri. She spent 11 months on the front line and evacuated a lot of wounded from the front line during her career. Now she's an activist of a women activist movement. So it would be good to have an opinion from a person which is not representing public authorities, although a person who was on the front line. So in our previous report as of 2017, we have informed on some high-profile cases like deadly turnkeys, supplied to the servicemen who got broken when the soldiers were trying to use them in order to stop the blood. But since then, the situation changed for the better. Is that right or no? Well, good afternoon. I'd like to express words of gratitude for raising this topic. And indeed, it's very painful for me to hear about the corruption cases in the armed forces. I actually never wanted to serve in the armed forces. I wanted to serve in the voluntary units. Although we are working on the protection of rights of veterans and other military servicewomen, and when analyzing some dimensions of this topic, we see a lot of corruption. And this corruption is already deeply rooted in the MOD structures. And I just want to come up with a certain case which is not related to medical procurements, although it's related to military servicemen who sometimes well, pay for being appointed to certain positions. And if they bought certain position, um, and the other person was appointed, well, he would be pushed out of this position. He would be forced to buy another position for himself. Speaking about medicine, speaking about COVID, in the beginning of 2020, when we had the quarantine, we had to, well, transfer a lot of masks, a lot of other equipment to the armed forces. Now we are running the analysis on the reproductive health of men and women and some of the impact on the veterans. So after my service in the voluntary unit, I didn't have a lot of knowledge, but I've learned that there is a military medical forum with a lot of medicines that should be provided to the military servicemen, although the military servicemen never actually receive it. And when we saw a lot of medical equipment, a lot of procurements that should be done, something like 10 to 12,000 hryvnia per each of the servicemen. It doesn't look like a big amount of money, and yet like 5 or 10,000 would be picked up by certain people. And then Mr. Homchak would be buying himself a new apartment. And it's great that due to our organizations, we would be able to, well, solve this corruption. Thank you to, to those serving in the armed forces who are fighting against that sort of a situation. But unfortunately, that was the case. Well, thank you indeed for your point of view. You've articulated the challenge in a proper manner because, in fact, the situation might not look as it is presented on paper in documents, because not all the servicemen receive what they're entitled to. Maybe there are other questions to Svitlana with regards to the presentation, because unfortunately one of the speakers was unable to join us. So I suggest to have a discussion among the people who joined us at this roundtable. So we agreed with the outcomes and the summary of this report, but if there are any joint questions or anything we would like to clear out, so please, this is the right time to discuss those aspects. I do apologize. We talked about the specifics of medical procurements, and some says that we are procuring very unique medicines. Could you come up with some examples of medicines that are so unique that you cannot have more bidders. I mean, when you would not need to have a letter of commitment. I mean, some medicines or some services that are truly so unique that only a very limited amount of companies or bidders can provide. Well, the armed services, they serve under different conditions. We have different armed branches and services, and they have their own standard sort of equipment and gear and supplies. So based on the tasks of this or that unit, they're selecting some medical supplies or medical equipment which they consider necessary for fulfilling these or that tasks. So requirements to packaging, requirements to trademarks or something like that. These are mentioned in the list of required medical equipment for the military unit. Then there is an order of the Ministry of Defense that clearly regulates what sort of medical supplies these or that serviceman should have when he's serving a certain area or fulfilling certain activity. Thank you for your explanation. I do have a question as well, and I would very like to hear a few words from Medical Command. You are the result of a transformation. So a Department for Medical Supplies was transformed into a military medical command. This is part of our integration into NATO because we want to comply with NATO standards. And this transformation was conducted in support of a centralization, in support of the unity of command over the medical forces, as well as in order to increase the effectiveness for the medical supply system. These transformation happened in the beginning of 2020. It would be interesting to hear from you. A year has passed since the beginning of the pandemics. And how did you develop your capabilities over that period of time? Do you have any training from NATO experts? How Tatiana mentioned that we need professionalization. What is the situation with that point? Well, we're not growing, we're not, developing the customer, so to say. The military health support institutions, they have a positions for military procurement officers with corresponding experience who are doing the procurements, although, as you might understand, medical procurements consumes a lot of time and efforts. And that is why basically the public officials have to fulfill a lot of additional work. We're supposed to have amendments to the law on medical procurements, and this law would allow us to have unauthorized officials who would be able to pass specific training, and I believe this would increase the professionalization of procurements and would reduce the risks of procurements. So you are waiting for this law. Yes, we're getting ready for that law to be passed. And maybe, Mr. Chana, in this department for medical procurements, maybe you have the professionalization. Yes. We sometimes pass a special training at the National Defense University. Sometimes we have online presentations and at Prozoro. We can watch something. Speaking on the professionalization, well, I'd say that the personnel of the department are fairly professional, fairly experts, and more questions arise with regards to the military units. Well, we learned the experience of other structural units, the other ministries. So we are trying to sort of develop ourselves as an experts, but based on what we see right now, we still did not reach a proper level of professionalization in order to, well, save a lot of money, because there is a difference in the amount of money saved by the military procurements and civilian procurements in the medical sphere. So if we don't have any questions from the audience and from our experts, we've already introduced some of the conclusions. We've already presented with the summary and recommendation. So hopefully our roundtable, our presentation would facilitate the improvements in the system. And we can already see that if compared with what was happening 4 years ago, the situation has improved, and we don't have too many high-profile cases. Only a few high-profile cases were identified, in fact, and it's good that this system is becoming more centralized, that we are moving towards NATO, that we're starting to work under NATO standards. So it's just a question how to work in further and how to proceed with the reform and to ensure more improvements and better qualitative and quantitative results that would not be questionable by anyone. And at this point, we all agreed that we need more professionalization, and I'm grateful for the participation, for your feedback on our report. This report was officially provided to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and we hope that our recommendations, at least partially, would be implemented. And once again, those recommendations were also mentioned by the other anti-corruption bodies who analyzed now the medical procurement systems. Thank you everyone for participation. So everyone have a lively summer day, and we'll see you.